Okay, so that was it for the getting set up and the SDKs. The next section is using S3 for storage. And again, I have this section in this course because this is one of the most common use cases. You're going to see many applications get deployed on AWS and then either originally or initially or at some point later on start using S3 for storage. Log files, things like that from your servers also usually get stored in S3. Lots of use cases for S3, so let's go through some of the fundamentals of it so you can understand why everybody uses it. First of all, it's designed for an unbelievable 11 nines durability. Okay, 11 nines durability means if I put 10,000 objects in a bucket, which is a container for objects in S3, it will take 10 million years before one gets lost. Okay, now the way they do that is when you upload an object to S3, they replicate it to many locations around a particular region. Those locations are called availability zones, by the way, and again, we went into that more in the previous session. But basically what happens is because they replicate your objects in disparate locations that are probably 20 to 30 or 40 miles apart from one another, they're pretty immune to anything happening to the data, even natural disasters and stuff like that. So that means you really can't find any more durable place to store your data than S3. The service is designed for 99.99% availability so that when you need your objects, you can get them. Use a very simple put get rest API, which SSL endpoint, so that means your data will be encrypted as it's being transmitted and retrieved from S3. You could also have your objects automatically encrypted by the S3 service before they're stored. So that gives you server-side encryption, which is essentially really important for a lot of security compliance requirements that tell you that you can't store these files unless they're encrypted. It also has a versioning option, and the versioning option is a very powerful thing that helps you protect against objects being accidentally overwritten or deleted. So in other words, if I try to copy an object into an S3 bucket that already exists, it won't overwrite it. It will just create a new version of it. And that protects you in case you basically screwed up and overwrote a very important piece of data that you needed to keep. Also, when you try to delete it, it actually doesn't really delete it. It just puts a marker on top of it that pretends it's deleted, so you can actually undelete it. With S3, you can also control who has access to your data and make it very limited in privilege. So with IAM, you create permissions policies for users, as we saw already. And you could say this user could read from this particular S3 bucket. This one could put data into this bucket. So this user has no access at all to this bucket, those types of things. So you can control access to S3 objects with IAM. Another nice feature of S3 is that it allows you to set up an automatic replication of your objects to a different region or a second region. And this is not on by default, and that's because they don't want to be in the business of moving people's data into regions that they shouldn't be. They leave it up to you. So if you want to have your data kept in two different regions, maybe thousands of miles apart for security compliance requirements, that's an easy thing to set up on S3. You basically just create a bucket in one region and then a bucket in a second region, and you enable cross-region replication, and that way any data that gets written to that bucket will automatically be copied over to the second bucket. Now, not everything you store on S3 needs to be open to the public. In fact, by default, when you upload an object to S3, it's going to be private, okay? That means only the person who put in the object is going to be able to get it out, okay? So unless somebody has explicit permissions to read objects from that bucket. But by default, it's just that person and any other person that's been given permissions. But you can give other people who aren't IAM users, say like you have employees or something like that, that you want to be able to see your object, you can give them permissions without giving the whole world permissions, and that's through something called a signed URL. So what you do is you use the S3 service to generate a private signed URL that has some encryption characters in it. And then it also has an expiration. And you can give that URL to users and say, okay, you can download this object, here's the URL, but you have to do it in the next 30 minutes, right? And then after that, the URL expires. And then in addition to private content, you can make objects public. And this is really useful like for a web page. So if I have a public web page and I want to include images and JavaScript and CSS files, and I want to put those in an S3 bucket, you could actually have URLs point straight to them in S3 so that when the browser loads the HTML file, it only loads the HTML from your web server. And the rest of the objects, the images, the CSS, and JavaScript, those are all pulled directly from S3.